You've seen it. The generation that was supposed to fall in line never did. Boomers tried authority. Millennials and Gen Z tried inspiration, purpose, and constant check-ins. Corporations tried loyalty programs, mission statements, and family language. Governments and media tried narratives. And Gen X just kept doing their own thing. Born roughly 1965 to 1980, they're now in their mid-40s to early 60s. 50-plus years on this planet, and the same pattern keeps showing up. They don't get controlled easily. Not by bosses, not by trends, not by institutions, not even by their own kids sometimes. This isn't just attitude. It's cognitive architecture. Today we're going deep into the psychology, the wiring that formed when nobody was watching, and why attempts to manage, persuade, or direct this generation so often bounce off. Let's get into it. Who they are and the world that built them. Generation X sits in a unique historical slot. Too young for the cultural fireworks of the 1960s, too old to be digital natives. They came of age during rising divorce rates, dual-income households becoming normal, economic shocks, Watergate, the end of the Cold War, and the first massive wave of corporate downsizing. They were the first peacetime generation in which both parents working or a single parent working long hours was common, and widespread after-school care simply didn't exist at scale. The result? The Latchkey generation. Kids let themselves into empty houses, made their own snacks, entertained themselves, handled the afternoon, sometimes the evening, sometimes more. This wasn't always idyllic freedom. Research and personal accounts describe loneliness, parentification, kids taking on adult emotional or practical roles, and real risks. But it was also a high-contingency environment. Actions had immediate, unbuffered consequences. No adult constantly mediating cause and effect. Cognitive science and developmental psychology tell us that prolonged exposure to those conditions shapes the brain differently. Executive function, planning, risk assessment, self-regulation gets repeated practice. The prefrontal circuits involved in forecasting consequences get exercised early and often. Peter Gray and colleagues have reviewed the evidence linking unsupervised, self-directed childhood time to greater competence, confidence, and internal control. The mechanism is straightforward. You learn you can handle problems by actually handling them, not by being rescued or directed through everyone. That early operating system is still running. Internal locus of control, the core wiring. One of the most important concepts here is locus of control from Julian Rotter's work. People with a strong internal locus of control believe outcomes largely depend on their own actions, skills, and decisions. People with a more external locus attribute results to luck, powerful others, systems, or fate. Gen X childhoods heavily favored the internal version. If the TV reception was bad, you adjusted the antenna or hit the side of the set. If you got locked out, you figured it out. If you scraped your knee 3 blocks from home, you assessed whether you could make it back. Thousands of micro-decisions without an adult safety net. The psychological result: a deep, often unspoken conviction that, I've got this, and a corresponding discomfort when someone tries to take the steering wheel. Modern supervised childhoods often teach a different lesson. Safety comes from the system, from parents, from rules, from constant monitoring. Gen X learned safety comes from paying attention and acting. That creates a background alertness and a preference for agency over protection. When someone later tries to control them through micromanagement, rigid protocols, or emotional appeals that feel manipulative, it collides with this foundational belief: my outcomes are mine to manage. Attempts at external control feel not just annoying, but cognitively dissonant. Psychological reactance, the freedom defense system. Enter one of the most relevant theories for this generation. Psychological reactance, developed by Jack Brem in the 1960s. The basic idea is simple and powerful. When people perceive that a behavioral freedom is being threatened or eliminated, they experience a motivational state aimed at restoring that freedom. The stronger the perceived threat, and the more important the freedom, the stronger the reactance. Gen X grew up with unusual early autonomy. Independence wasn't a reward for good behavior. It was the default operating condition that made autonomy highly valued and highly sensitive to threat. Later in life, when a boss says, "This is how we do things now," or a cultural message insists, "Everyone must think/feel/act this way," or a system demands performative loyalty, reactance kicks in. It doesn't always look like open rebellion. Often it's quiet noncompliance, selective engagement, sarcasm, or simply doing the work their own way while nodding along. Loyalty is given to competence and proven results, not to titles or institutional narratives. Research on family of origin predictors of reactance shows that environments emphasizing independence and achievement orientation tend to produce higher reactance sensitivity. Gen X's childhoods checked those boxes at scale. This is why heavy-handed management styles, guilt-based motivation, or ideological pressure so often fail with this cohort. The harder you push the freedom threat, the more energy goes into restoring it. Hyper-independence, agency, and the cost of reliance. There's a darker and more precise term that shows up in clinical discussions. Hyper-independence. It starts as an adaptive survival strategy. When help is unreliable or unavailable, the brain learns not to need it. Asking becomes associated with disappointment or danger. Self-soothing and self-solving become automatic. In adulthood, this can look like strength, and it often is. Gen Zers are frequently described as resourceful, low-drama problem solvers who don't need constant validation. They score relatively high on traits linked to self-control, long-term orientation, and competence in some large psychological assessments. But the same wiring can create friction. Collaboration that feels like dependence, emotional vulnerability that requires trusting others with needs, or systems that demand compliance before competence is proven. All can trigger the old, "I'll handle it myself" reflex. Agency is central here. Agency is the belief that your actions produce tangible effects on your environment. Gen X childhoods were full of direct feedback loops. Fix it or it stays broken. Entertain yourself or be bored. Navigate the neighborhood or get lost. That produces a generation that respects demonstrated skill far more than credentials or hierarchical position. Show me it works beats trust the process, or because I said so. Institutional distrust compounds this. They watched Watergate, economic promises break, corporate loyalty evaporate in the 80s and 90s downsizing waves, and later the Great Recession hit their peak earning years hard. Systems fail. People and skills are more reliable. So control attempts that rely on institutional authority, emotional belonging, or future promises often land flat. Competence and autonomy land better. Why control fails in midlife and beyond? Now they're past 50. The same cognitive patterns are still running, but with more resources, status, and less need to please. Midlife Gen Zers are often the ones holding organizations together while older generations exit and younger ones demand different cultures. They're the bridge generation, analog childhood, digital adulthood, which gives them unusual cognitive flexibility, but also a low tolerance for nonsense from either direction. Attempts to control them now face several reinforced barriers. Entrenched internal locus, decades of evidence that they can figure things out. Reactance sensitivity, any perceived illegitimate constraint still activates the restore freedom motive. Competence loyalty, they will follow someone who is clearly skilled and fair. They will not follow a title or a narrative alone. Low need for external validation. Many learned early that attention was scarce. They don't require constant praise or belonging signals the way some other cohorts do. Pragmatic filtering, a well-honed BS detector shaped by watching institutions and marketing from childhood. Excitement is conserved until results appear. This doesn't mean Gen X is unmanageable or antisocial. Many are excellent leaders, parents, and colleagues when treated as autonomous adults. They respond well to clear goals, genuine autonomy, respect for their time and skills, and results-based evaluation. What fails is the controlling style, hovering, guilt, ideology-first messaging, performative culture, or treating them like they need to be fixed or inspired into compliance. Interestingly, many Gen X parents became more protective of their own children than their parents were of them. The classic free-range kids who became helicopter or highly involved parents. That suggests the independence was learned under constraint, not pure preference. They know both the costs of too little support and the costs of too much control. The strengths and the trade-offs. The same psychology that makes Gen X hard to control also produces real strengths. Resilience under ambiguity, practical problem-solving, emotional self-containment when needed, and the ability to operate without constant external structure. Comfort with solitude, developed through hours alone after school, is another under-discussed advantage. Research links greater comfort being alone with lower depression and higher life satisfaction in some studies. The trade-offs are real too. Hyper-independence can become isolation. Difficulty asking for help can turn into carrying unsustainable loads. Emotional distance can strain intimacy. Unprocessed early experiences of neglect or inconsistency can surface in midlife under stress. None of this is destiny for every individual. Generational patterns are averages and tendencies shaped by shared conditions, not rigid programming. Plenty of Gen Zers had involved parents. Plenty of people from other generations developed strong internal control and healthy reactance. But at the cohort level, the cognitive and developmental pathways are clear enough to explain the pattern. A generation that practiced agency early, valued freedom highly, learned systems are unreliable, and built identity around figuring it out themselves does not surrender control easily, even 50 years later. Closing. So the next time you see a Gen Zer quietly ignoring a corporate pep talk, solving a problem without escalation, or refusing to perform enthusiasm on demand, you're not just seeing attitude. You're seeing the long-term output of a particular developmental environment. High contingency, low supervision, repeated practice of self-direction, and the psychological defenses that grew from it. Internal locus of control, psychological reactance, agency, competence over authority. That's why the usual control levers, hierarchy, belonging, pressure, narrative, micromanagement so often fail. They were never designed to work on people who learned very early that the only reliable control is the one they exercise themselves. If this resonated, drop a comment with your own Latchkey story or the moment you realize control attempts just bounce off this generation. And if you want more deep dives into generational psychology without the usual stereotypes, subscribe. Thanks for watching. Stay competent. Stay free. Rot in stillness.